32 years building custom homes in the Fraser Valley, and the one thing I learned that no client ever believed until it was too late. The cracks you ignore in the foundation are always the ones that bring the wall down. I retired at 61, not because I had to, because I'd earned it, and I knew it, and I wasn't going to let anyone talk me out of claiming it. My wife Colette and I had spent the better part of a decade talking about the cabin. Not dreaming, talking. Actual plans, actual savings account, actual arguments about whether we needed 2 bathrooms or could manage with 1 and a good outhouse. We settled on 2 bathrooms. Colette won that one, and she was right to. The property was 40 minutes north of Kelowna, up a gravel road that discouraged casual visitors, which was most of the appeal. 4 acres of mixed forest, a creek that ran properly in spring and trickled politely the rest of the year, and a view of the valley that made you understand why people stayed in BC even when the winters were long and everything cost twice what it should. We built the cabin ourselves. I mean that literally. I designed it. I hired 2 guys I'd worked with for 15 years, and the 3 of us framed it, sided it, roofed it, and finished it over the course of 2 summers. Colette picked the interior. I didn't argue with her about that either. By the time we moved in full-time, I was 62 and felt like I'd finally exhaled for the first time since my 20s. The nearest town was a 20-minute drive. We had a dog named Rascal, who took his job as chief deck supervisor very seriously. Colette made her sourdough on Fridays. I cut wood in the mornings, and read in the afternoons, and went to bed when it got dark, and slept like I'd never heard the word deadline. For 10 months, it was the life I'd been building towards since I was 29 years old, working 14-hour days in the rain. I didn't know yet that it was about to be treated as a resource. Welcome back to Dad's final revenge. Get comfortable. Every person in these stories convinced themselves they were the reasonable one. They weren't. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming. Our daughter Paige had married a man named Elliot 3 years before we finished the cabin. I want to be careful here, because Paige is my daughter, and I love her without conditions, but I also want to be honest. I had watched Elliot for 3 years with the particular attention of a man who builds things for a living and knows how to spot a structure that looks solid from the outside and isn't. He was charming. He was good at dinner parties. He worked in financial planning, which in my experience means he was very comfortable explaining why your money should be somewhere it currently wasn't. They lived in a nice semi in Langley. 2 kids. Our grandson Marcus, who was 5, and our granddaughter Lily, who was 3 and had recently decided her life's purpose was to hand me pine cones with the gravity of someone presenting state documents. I adored both of them without reservation. Elliot's parents were named Bernard and Wendy. I'd met them a handful of times at the expected occasions. Wendy was a woman who filled a room with opinions the way some people fill rooms with perfume, immediately, completely, and whether you'd asked for it or not. Bernard was quieter. He'd worked in municipal contracting until his knees gave out, and he had the particular stillness of a man who'd learned long ago that the path of least resistance ran directly through Wendy. In October, about 10 months into our cabin life, Paige called on a Sunday afternoon. Her tone was the one I'd learned to clock when she was 16, the careful, preparatory tone that precedes something she already knows I'm not going to love. Dad, we wanted to talk to you about something. I am not exaggerating when I say a trapdoor opened somewhere in my stomach. Sure, I said. I carried my coffee to the deck. If a conversation is going to be unpleasant, I prefer to have it somewhere with a decent view. Elliot and Paige came out the following Saturday. Colette made lunch. It was a good day, the kind of day the Okanagan produces in October, like it's apologizing for what's coming. Clear sky, the aspens already yellow, Marcus and Lily running Rascal around the property, while the adults settled on the deck with mugs that kept getting refilled. Then Elliot set his mug down and leaned forward in the way he leaned forward when he was about to explain something to you. So, he said, Wendy and Bernard. You know they've been dealing with some things. I did know. Bernard's knees had been replaced twice with limited success, and Wendy, I'd heard through Paige, had taken an early buyout from the school board where she'd worked as an administrator, a decision I gathered had not been entirely voluntary. What kind of things? Colette asked. Financial, mostly. Bernard's disability payments only go so far, and Wendy's having trouble finding work. They're in a condo in Abbotsford that's honestly too expensive for what they're getting. The building's old. The heat doesn't work properly in winter. He paused. We were thinking, just for a while, just until we sort something out, maybe they could stay up here, in the third bedroom. Colette and I had one third bedroom. It had a bed, a window that faced the creek, and a quilt her mother had made. It had never once been occupied by anyone we hadn't specifically invited. The valley sat there below us, absolutely indifferent to the conversation happening above it. How long is a while? I asked. 3 months. Maybe 4, just through the worst of winter. I looked at Colette. Colette looked at me. Paige was studying the grain of the deck boards with forensic focus. Let us think about it, Colette said. Elliot smiled. He smiled before she finished the sentence. I noted it and said nothing. That week was what I would come to think of as the lobbying phase. Elliot texted. Paige called. Wendy, who I want to emphasize, had previously phoned me exactly twice. Once for our phone number, and once by accident, left a voicemail that ran to 11 minutes and contained the sentence, "We just need someone in our corner right now," no fewer than 4 times. Bernard sent a text that was 4 lines long and formally polite, in a way that suggested he'd written it under supervision. Colette softened. I watched it happen day by day. She's a compassionate woman. It's one of the things I've loved about her for 34 years, and it is, occasionally, the thing that makes her vulnerable to people who recognize it from across a room. She started saying things like, "It is only temporary, and the cabin is big enough, and Marcus and Lily would love having grandparents nearby." I listened. I didn't argue. I didn't commit. Then Elliot came up alone one Tuesday afternoon, no Paige, and sat across from me at the kitchen table with the calm of a man presenting a proposal he already considered approved. "I think there's some hesitation on your end," he said. "Solid read," I said. He smiled. It didn't reach anywhere above his jaw. "I get it. It's your space. But I want to be honest with you. Bernard's knees are genuinely bad. The cold makes it worse. And the cabin, you've got to admit, it's not like you're using that third bedroom." "We use it for guests we invite," I said. "Right. But family." Family," I said, "is a category people apply to requests they'd like to skip the asking part of." He went quiet for a moment. Then, "Paige is stressed about this. When she's stressed, it affects the whole family. Affects the kids." He let that sit. "I just want you to understand the full picture." And there it was. Neat as a dovetail joint. He'd just held my daughter's well-being and my grandchildren over the table like a bargaining chip. He'd done it calmly and without raising his voice, and with the complete confidence of a man who had never once been called on it. I smiled at him. "Let me talk to Colette," I said. He left satisfied, the way men like Elliot always leave satisfied. I stood at the window and watched his truck go down the gravel road, and I made a decision I haven't regretted once. I said yes. But first I made a phone call. His name was Phil. I'd known him since we were framing houses together in our early 30s. He'd pivoted into security and smart home systems about 15 years ago and built a solid business doing it. I called him the evening Elliot's taillights disappeared. "I need cameras," I said, "inside and out. The kind that don't miss anything. Motion, activated, both, and I need it done before the guests arrive." There was a pause. Then Phil said, "What's going on, Ross?" "I'm documenting my own home," I said, "before anyone gets the chance to redefine it." He drove up 2 days later with his apprentice. They installed 8 cameras total: front door, main living area, kitchen, back deck, the hallway, outside the third bedroom, the driveway, the woodshed, and one covering the access road from the tree line. All connected to an app on my phone and backed up to a cloud server. Motion activated, audio enabled. All of it legal under BC privacy law for cameras on private residential property. I'd looked it up. I moved our important documents, the property deed, the will, the financial records, into the locked drawer of my desk in the loft. Then I moved my grandfather's tools into a cabinet I put a padlock on. Then I moved Colette's mother's quilt out of the third bedroom and into our closet. Colette watched me carry the quilt. "You're being a bit much," she said. "Probably," I said. I didn't tell her about the cameras. Not because I keep things from her. I don't, and 34 years would suggest she'd notice if I tried, but because I needed everyone to behave naturally. If Colette knew, she'd be watchful. Watchful people are noticed. I needed the cabin to feel exactly like what everyone assumed it was. I was more right than I knew. Bernard and Wendy arrived on a gray Friday in November. Wendy walked in, looked at the main room, and said, "Oh, this is rustic," she said, rustic the way you might say it about a restaurant you'd been warned about and were reserving judgment. She ran her fingers along the kitchen counter. She examined the living room window. She stood in the doorway of the third bedroom for a long moment before pronouncing it cozy. Bernard thanked me at the door with a handshake I respected. His knees were visibly worse than they'd been at the wedding. He moved with the careful economy of a man who'd learned not to trust his own legs. I felt genuine sympathy for that. I told him where the grab bar was in the bathroom and where I kept the extra blankets. He thanked me again. There was something in his face I'd see more of in the weeks ahead. The look of a man who suspects things are not what he's been told they are. Wendy was the weather system. Bernard was the man who'd learned to live in it. By day 3, she had reorganized the kitchen. I came down on Monday morning, and my cast iron pan, the one I've been seasoning since 2011, was on the middle shelf under the counter instead of hanging by the stove. The coffee mugs were rearranged by size. The spice rack had been alphabetized. "Wendy," I said, with the patience of a man who has been married 34 years and raised a teenager, "did you reorganize the kitchen?" "I did," she said. "It flows so much better this way. You'll see, this is our kitchen." "Oh, I know. I just thought, since I'm cooking too now, it makes more sense to have things." "It makes sense where they were," I said. I put the pan back by the stove. She moved it back under the counter while I was in the shower the next morning. We did this 3 times before I recognized it as a campaign and started saving my energy for what mattered. The cameras were, through all of this, watching. The first real alert came in week 2. I was cutting wood at the shed when my phone buzzed. Kitchen camera. Motion. I set the axe down, pulled out my phone, and opened the app. Wendy was at the kitchen table. She had a notepad. She was on the phone, and she had her voice in that particular low register people use when they believe the walls aren't listening. I turned up the audio. "The main bedroom is huge, Elliot. They've got a whole loft above it they barely use. I'm telling you, this property is 4 acres. There's no reason." "No, I know. But if Ross and Colette take one of those long trips they keep talking about, we'd basically be the caretakers. Which, to be honest, is what this place needs anyway." A pause. She laughed. "Permanent isn't the word I'd use yet. But I'm saying it's worth the conversation. They're retired, they're going to want to travel. And someone responsible should be here." I stood in the yard with my phone in my hand for a long moment. A raven landed on the woodpile and looked at me. I went back inside, poured myself a coffee, and asked Wendy if she'd slept well. She said the mattress in the third bedroom was a bit firm. I said I'd look into it. I was so pleasant about everything that morning that I think it unsettled her slightly, though she couldn't have said why. I texted Phil, "You'll want to hear what I've been collecting." He texted back, "Keep everything." By week 3, the pattern was clear. Elliot visited often, more than felt casual for a man with a business to run and a family an hour and a half away. He and Wendy had long conversations on the back deck. I'd placed that camera under the eave overhang, and the audio in cold, still air was exceptional. What I collected over those sessions cumulatively was this. Wendy believed Colette was the more agreeable one, and the more likely to come around to a longer-term arrangement. Elliot had apparently told her to work on Colette directly. There was a reference to the cabin sitting half-empty in summer when Colette and I visited Paige's family in Langley. There was a discussion of converting the loft into a second living space, and there was a conversation about the property value and what a formal caretaking arrangement could mean for them financially, and whether any of that might eventually appear in an estate plan if handled correctly. I want to be precise about this last part. They were discussing what they might be positioned to inherit. I was 62 years old, in good health, sitting in a chair I'd built myself, listening to people discuss my estate on my own deck. Bernard was not part of these conversations. I noticed that. I also noticed that one evening when Elliot had left and Wendy had gone in to start dinner, Bernard sat in the other Muskoka chair on the dock and stared at the creek for a long time. I walked down and sat in the other one. We sat in silence for a while. That's the kind of silence I understand. It's the same silence you get when two people on a job site both see the same structural problem, and neither one wants to be the one to say it out loud. Bernard, I said eventually. I know, he said. Just that, I know. Two words that told me everything. Did Elliot tell you this was a 3-month arrangement? I asked. A long pause. He said you and Colette were open to a longer conversation. There it was. We weren't, I said. We aren't. Bernard looked at the water. Something moved in his face that wasn't quite shame and wasn't quite relief, but was in the territory of both. I suspected, he said. I told Wendy before we came that we should be clear with you about the terms. She said I was being rigid. We sat there until the light went off the creek. You're not responsible for this, I said. I'm a grown man, he said, which means I am. We didn't speak of it again that night. We didn't need to. The moment everything broke open came in week 5 on a Wednesday. Colette and I had driven into Kelowna for a few things: groceries, hardware, a birthday dinner for a friend that had been on the calendar for 2 months. We were an hour away when my phone lit up. Living room camera, motion. I opened the app. Elliot was in my house. He hadn't called. He hadn't texted. He'd let himself in. He had a key that Wendy, I would later confirm, had taken from the hook by the front door and had at some point copied. There is a Walmart in Abbotsford that does key cutting. I know because I checked the timestamp on the app against when they'd last visited. He was standing in my living room with a man I didn't recognize. The man had a messenger bag and was looking at the loft. Wendy was talking. The staircase to the loft could be opened up. If you take out the half wall there, you get a completely different sightline through the hole. Elliot. Paige's voice. She was there. She was in my house. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, and her face had the careful look of a woman who has been told something is fine and is not certain it is. This isn't right. They're not home. It doesn't have to be a whole thing. It's still their house. I couldn't hear what Elliot said back, but I could see his posture, and his posture said, "This is already decided, and you're the one making it a whole thing." The man with the messenger bag took out a notebook. Colette was standing next to me in the superstore parking lot. She was holding a bag of clementines. She hadn't seen any of it. "Everything okay?" she said. "We need to go home," I said. "What happened?" "I'll tell you in the truck," I said. I want to be honest about the drive back. I expected to feel the kind of cold clarity I'd felt building for 5 weeks, and that was there. But underneath it, something else was there too. My daughter had been standing in my kitchen while a man with a notebook looked at my loft, and whatever she'd known or not known about the plan, she'd been there. That one sat differently. We pulled up the gravel road, and Elliot's truck was in the driveway. I sat in my truck for a moment, let things settle. Colette was watching me. "How bad?" she said. "Bad enough," I said. We went inside. Paige saw my face first, and she went still the way she went still at 17, when I'd come home and found the dent in my truck she'd been hoping I wouldn't notice for another few days. Elliot was facing the kitchen. He turned around, and for half a second, before the professional smoothness came back down like a blind, his face was the face of a man who'd been caught. The man with the messenger bag was, apparently, a contractor friend of Elliot's. He found a reason to leave within about 90 seconds. Ross, Elliot said. "We were just taking a look. In my house," I said, without calling. "Wendy let us in, so Wendy doesn't have authority to let anyone into this house," I said. "She's a guest. Guests don't distribute keys." I was very calm. Colette was standing beside me and she was very calm. I think the calm was more unsettling to Elliot than anger would have been. "Let's sit down," I said. We sat at the kitchen table. Wendy and Bernard came in from the back. Bernard looked at the floor. Wendy looked at me with the expression of someone recalibrating their approach. "I have something to show all of you," I said. I put my phone on the table. I opened the app, and I played to them the recording from week 2. Wendy's voice filled the kitchen. Permanent isn't the word I'd use yet, but I'm saying it's worth the conversation. The kitchen went very quiet. "That's," Elliot started. "Legal," I said. "Single-party consent on private residential property in BC. My cameras, my property, my documentation. You've been recording us this whole time." Wendy's voice had a particular quality to it. "I've been documenting my own home," I said, "which I started doing after my son-in-law told me a 3-month arrangement And then I heard his mother describe it as a long-term conversation on a phone call she didn't realize she was having with me. I looked at Paige. She was doing the kind of arithmetic that leaves a mark. Elliot, she said quietly, did you tell me I was stressed? Elliot shifted. Did you bring that up to my dad? My stress, my marriage? His jaw moved. He didn't answer. You used that, she said. Quiet, level. The way Colette goes quiet when she means it most. You used my stress to pressure my parents. Then I played the deck conversations. Both of them. I played the part about Colette being the more agreeable one, about working on her. I watched Colette's face during that part. I have been married to this woman for 34 years. I have seen her angry 3 times in a way that scared me. This was the 4th. I played the part about the estate. Wendy said, "That's taken completely out of context." Wendy, I said, I want to be thoughtful here, so I'm going to say this carefully. You came into my home as a guest. You reorganized my kitchen without permission. You had a key to my property copied without asking. You had your son bring a contractor into my house while I wasn't here, and you were recorded discussing my estate. I paused. That's not context. That's a pattern. Elliot tried 3 more approaches in the next 40 minutes. An appeal to Paige framed as concern for their marriage. An argument about family obligation that stopped just short of being a guilt trip, but didn't stop short enough. A pivot to practicality, suggesting that the arrangement had already been so beneficial that it seemed a shame to. Colette said, no. Just that. One word. She didn't raise her voice. She said no the way you say no to something that doesn't require elaboration. That was the end of the argument. You have 2 weeks, I said. 2 weeks to make other arrangements. Elliot said, Ross, I think you're being. I know what you think, I said. What I think is that I have audio of a conversation about my estate conducted on my deck without my knowledge, and I haven't played all of it yet. I'd like to keep it that way. Whether I do will depend entirely on how the next 2 weeks go. He went still. We clear? I said. He nodded. Wendy was collecting herself for another approach. Bernard looked at her. Something passed between them that I wasn't meant to see, but I saw it. He put his hand on her arm, and she stopped. The next 2 weeks had texture. Elliot called 3 times. He tried Colette twice, which was a miscalculation, given that she had heard the recording about being the more agreeable one. She fielded both calls with a courtesy that gave him nothing. Wendy attempted, on day 6, to speak to me about what she called starting fresh. I told her I was interested in 2 weeks going smoothly and had no interest in anything else. She tried to reframe the recordings as misunderstood. I told her I was interested in 2 weeks going smoothly. After the second time, I said that she stopped trying. On day 9, Paige drove up alone. She knocked on the door, which she'd never had to do before, and there was something in that small fact that landed heavier than I expected. We walked down to the dock. The creek was half frozen at the edges. Marcus had left one of his toy trucks on the dock in October, and it was still there, dusted with frost. I'd been leaving it. I didn't know about the contractor, she said. I want to say that first. I believe you, I said. I knew we were going up there. Elliot said it was just to talk to his parents. Check in. She paused. I should have asked more questions. Paige, I'm angry at myself, she said. Not at you. I want to be clear about that. She looked at the truck in the creek. I've been thinking about a lot of things. Okay, I said. He uses that, my stress. He's done it before. Not just with you. She said it the way you say something you've known for a while. That's become too heavy not to say out loud. I didn't see it. Or I saw it and told myself it wasn't what it looked like. I didn't say anything. Sometimes, being a father means understanding that silence is the right response. Dad, she said. Are you angry at me? I thought about her at 6 years old bringing me coffee grounds from the yard because she decided she should plant coffee so I didn't have to buy it anymore. I thought about her at 23, calling me from a parking lot in the rain because she'd gotten her first flat tire and couldn't figure out the jack. I thought about her standing in my kitchen with an expression that said she already knew something was wrong. No, I said. Not at you. She put her head on my shoulder. We stood there for a while, the two of us, watching the ice on the creek and not saying anything. I think I need to have some conversations, she said finally. I think you do, I said. Moving day came on a Tuesday. I was at the woodshed at 7 a.m. when Bernard found me. He was moving more carefully than when he'd arrived, the cold having settled into his joints over 5 weeks. He stopped a few feet away and held out his hand. "I owe you an apology," he said. "You don't," I said. "I do. I knew the terms we'd been told weren't the terms you'd agreed to. I told myself it would sort itself out." He paused. "That was convenient for me and unfair to you." We shook hands. He held on for an extra moment. "You built a good thing here," he said. "I hope they leave you alone to enjoy it." He walked back to help load the truck. Wendy walked past me on her second trip without making eye contact. She had the bearing of a woman who considered herself wronged and was building her case for posterity. I let her build it. Some arguments aren't worth winning because the other person will never allow the loss to be real. Elliot came last. He stood by his truck with the engine running. "I hope," he said, "that we can find a way past this." I looked at him in the way I look at a building I'm assessing. Not hostile, just thorough. "Elliot," I said, "you used my daughter's emotional state as leverage without her knowledge. You had your mother copy a key to my property. You brought a contractor into my house without permission or notice. You had conversations on my property about my estate that you believed were private, and when I called you on it, you tried to reframe it as my problem." He didn't say anything. "What I'd like you to understand," I said, "is that I didn't put cameras in my house because I wanted to catch anyone. I put cameras in my house because I know how to read a foundation. And what I read in that first conversation, when you smiled before Colette finished her sentence, was a man who thought the answer was already decided." I paused. The answer was never decided. It was always mine to give. He looked at me for a long moment. Something had gone out of his face. The professional smoothness was still there, but under it was something else. The particular expression of a man who has realized too late that he had fundamentally misread the situation, that the quiet guy with the cabin and the dog wasn't slow or a soft target. He'd just been patient. "Drive safe," I said. They were gone by 10:30. Colette came out with 2 mugs, the good ones, the ones we bought at a pottery show in Penticton the summer before we retired. She handed me mine and we sat on the deck. Rascal materialized from somewhere in the tree line and arranged himself across my feet, which he does when he decides the deck needs ballast. "Well," Colette said. "Well," I said. We watched a pair of Canada geese come in low over the valley and settle on the creek below the property line. "You knew from the beginning," she said. "I knew the night he smiled before you finished the sentence." She looked at me. "You could have said something." "I needed them to show me," I said. "Not tell me. Anyone can tell you who they are. Give them enough rope and they'll show you." She was quiet for a moment, the recording about me being the more agreeable one. "I know," I said. "That was the part that bothered me most," she said. "I know that too." She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. 34 years, she said. "You're still the more agreeable one," I said. "Don't push it," she said. I didn't push it. 8 weeks later, Paige told me she and Elliot were separating. She called on a Sunday, the same day of the week she'd called to start all of this, and I noticed that symmetry and said nothing about it. She was okay. Not fine. Okay. There's a difference, and she knew I understood it. I'm not going to tell you that I celebrated. The end of a marriage is not a thing you celebrate, even when the marriage had a structural problem you'd clocked from the 3rd year. My daughter was in pain. That was the only part of it that mattered to me. But when she came up to the cabin 2 weeks after that, alone, and sat on the deck and let the valley work on her for a while, and then looked over and said, "Dad, you knew the whole time, didn't you?" "Not the whole time," I said honestly. "I suspected, and then I paid attention." She shook her head. "That's the same thing." "It's really not," I said. "One is a feeling. The other is work." Marcus came running down from the tree line where he'd been collecting something. Rocks, sticks, the specific categories of treasure available to 5-year-olds, and launched himself at me from about 3 feet out with the absolute confidence that I would catch him. I did. The Canada geese were back on the creek. The aspen at the far edge of the property had gone bare, but the birches still had a few leaves, gold against the gray sky. Rascal was asleep under my chair. The cabin smelled like Colette's sourdough. Elliot, last I heard, had taken a position with a firm in Calgary. Bernard calls Paige occasionally, on his own. I don't know what they talk about. I'm glad he calls. Wendy, I'm told, has opinions about the whole situation. I filed that information in the same place I file all information that has no bearing on the life I've built. What I think about sometimes, when it's early and the fog is in the valley and I've got my coffee and the dog and the whole day ahead of me, is this: there's a certain kind of person who sees a man who's worked hard and built something and stepped back to enjoy it, and what they see is a gap in the defenses. They see a person who will accommodate, who will absorb, who moved slowly on the furniture dispute because it was easier than a fight. What they can't see, what quiet people don't advertise, is that the patience was never passivity. It was attention. It was documentation. It was 8 cameras, a cloud server, a locked drawer, and the specific knowledge that if you let people show themselves, they always will. I built this cabin with my hands. I know every beam in it. I know which floor joist has a slight flex and where the insulation needs topping up, and exactly how the light moves across the main room in the afternoon from October to March. It's mine. Not because my name is on the deed, though it is, because I made it. Some things are worth protecting. The cabin is quiet again. The cast iron pan is hanging where it belongs. Colette baked her sourdough on Friday, and we ate it warm, with the good butter from the farm stand up the road. And Marcus fell asleep on the couch, under Colette's mother's quilt. And the geese came back to the creek as the light went, and Rascal lifted his head once, and then decided it was fine. It was, in every way I know how to measure, exactly what I built it to be.